Welcome back. Geraint Davies is a Labour backbencher and known for a no-nonsense tell-it-how-it-is MP, and in my opinion it's a welcome breath of fresh air from all the lies the Conservatives speak or the tiptoeing around Brexit that Labour benchers do. In the debate on the autumn budget, he gave an outstanding speech on the current state of the country under Conservative rule. And what I really like about this is that he reminds people what happened under a Labour government. We don't hear enough of that. We hear the Tories constantly telling people Labour doesn't have a plan, but they also need to be reminded of what achievements Labour had, and in doing so, you can see the utter devastation the Conservatives have left this country in. But enough of me waffling. Here, have a listen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we're told it's not the government's fault. The biggest fall in living standards we've seen in living memory of 7%, the highest debt cost, the highest share of tax, roaring inflation, rising interest rates, 1 in 4 adults living in food poverty, 1 in 5 children. We've seen food banks going up from 26,000 in 2010 when Labour were in power to 2.6 million by the time we got to 2021. That's a 100-fold increase. That's before we went up to 1 in 4 people in food poverty. We're told, oh, it's all the pandemic, it's all the Ukraine. And we all appreciate, of course, we've had a pandemic and we've got a problem in the Ukraine. But in terms of the pandemic, we were the ones who had the vaccine first, and we had the highest death rate, over 200,000 people dead because of the recklessness in which it was managed. And in terms of the Ukraine, we're told by the government, we've got more protection because we only have 2% of Russian gas, and the EU is more exposed, which is true. So why is it that their economies and the G7 have all recovered to be larger than they were before the pandemic, other than the UK? Our Prime Minister, or rather the one before last, used to say every week, oh, there's another 500,000 people who are in jobs since the pandemic, but he forgot to include the self-employed. And the ONS pointed out, of course, we got 400,000 fewer people in jobs. And then, of course, there's the botched Brexit, isn't there? The OBR coming out, not many people are talking about this, with 4% lower productivity thanks to the botched Brexit, 15% lower trade, 6% higher food prices, lower wages, workforce shortages, higher inflation than the G7. As I said, the Prime Minister before last dressed up as Santa Claus, promising £350 million a week for the NHS, arrived on Christmas Eve with an empty sack with his deal, didn't he? And look where we are now, 7 million people on the waiting lists. And in Swansea, like elsewhere, we see rising numbers of people in food banks. Trade, we've got a situation where half of companies across Britain are saying they're trading much less or not at all with Europe. In fact, a quarter, 1 in 4 companies have given up altogether with trading with the EU. And as a share of GDP, trade is now 12.5% down. It's 2.5 times worse than any G7 country. We've got a deal with Australia, we're told, but again, the OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility, tells us, oh, that's going to add 0.1% to GDP over 15 years. The deal we did with Japan, which was worth £1.5 billion, would have been worth £2.6 billion had it been done via the EU, because we haven't got the trading muscle of a bigger grouping. And finally, the government says, oh, well, all these problems, they're Labour's fault. Well, Labour was in power 12 years ago. Somehow, the legacy is now with us. But of course, when Labour was in power, the economy grew by 40% in 10 years. And that money wasn't just frittered away. It was used to invest in doubling the expenditure in health, doubling the expenditure in NHS, lifting 1 million people out of poverty, or pensioners, 1 million people, or 1 million children out of poverty. And had that trend continued, the average wages in Britain would be £10,000 higher. We'd be more resilient to the pandemic, to the Ukraine, the energy crisis. And you want to say, well, is that possible? Well, yes, we've already heard that the average increase in average wages is £10,000 more in all other OECD countries, except for this one, this failed country, thanks to the legacy of the Tories over so many years, including George Osborne, who we now hear is giving advice to the Chancellor. You might be better off listening to Gordon Brown if you want some advice. The OECD, of course, have said and shown that greater inequality means less growth. And so we need a government that's fair and strong and green, which is not this. We're told by the Chancellor he aims to get the education expenditure up to the 2010 levels Labour left by next year. And what sort of record is that? We know in the last 10 years the amount spent on further education is 14% down. The amount spent on sixth forms is 28% down. How are we going to build growth if we're not investing in our young people? We need a situation where we've got real growth and tackle the debt problem. Because frankly, when Labour left office, the share of debt as a share of the economy is 45%. It's now grown to 90% and it'll live up to 100%. And as has been pointed out, there is the money with tax changes, for instance, by equalising capital gains tax with income tax, by taxing windfall profits, etc., to generate wealth, to generate investment in a way we can generate wealth in a fair and balanced way. We need a new government, is the truth of the matter. The last one has been a complete failure. We need a stronger, fairer, greener future, but we'll only get that with a change to a Labour government.
Absolutely fantastic. It's a shame there wasn't more people in the chamber to hear it. And so for that speech alone, you, sir, are a bona fide superstar. As I said in the intro, he isn't afraid to call out the ridiculous statements made by the government. And to see him dismantle the big calls right claim, you'll need to watch this video that's on screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.